the final paragraph, I think the second, the final of Beis Gimel. And he's explaining that Eden, Israel, which is Zoh, the Shoresh is Zoh, the Midas, Atzilus, from where Eden emerged. So they come from Reish Surim and Agvois, Migvois. That's the mountain peaks and the hills explained. I mentioned in the previous ois, the connection Dafka to Etzur, because here we're talking Chochmah and Binah, and the Midas, as they are in Chochmah, are analogous to the fire inside the rock, present but completely not discernible. Whereas Binah, the analogy is the coal, the flaming coal, where the fire is contained within the coal, but with only little effort, the coal can be fanned into a flame. So all Yidden are rooted in Chochmah and Binah, what he's saying. That makes them impervious to my attempt to curse them. On the contrary, brachas. All of this to explain, Hanikra B'shmi, which is the Dibra Masel of the Maimer, which is explaining the Targum Yonasan, that this pasuk, which comes behemshech to the psukim before that talk about the ingathering of the exiles when not one Jew is left behind, in very evocative, moving language described by Yeshayahu, very comforting. So, behemshech lazeh, this pasuk Hanikra B'shmi, that the Targum teaches that what's the hemshech advarim, that all of this happens because of those upon whom my name was called, and that's the Ovis. So that's the hemshech here to why he brings the psukim of Reish Surim and Agvois, Migvois, because that is also the Ovis, b'schus whom Eden are protected, and curses transformed into brachas. This mind is to explain this inyan b'pnimius. What is the maila? What's the inyan? We are rooted in the Ovis and the Imois, the Tzurim and Gvois, Chochmah and Binah. So the point of the previous ice was that the Midas exist in a very latent form, already in Chochmah and certainly in Binah. So let's continue. Yeah? You're hearing me okay, yes? It's different, yeah? I'm sorry, so I see him Reish Surim from the peaks of the rocks, top of the rocks, and from the hills. Who is him? That's Israel. So Midas, which is Zoh. Israel, the later the supernal Zoh. I see him is already rooted in Chochmah Reish Surim, Shekarel ala Ovis, referring to the Ovis. The Achri is Gam B'chinas Binah, and then in Binah Gvois, the hill Shekarel al Yimbois, which refers, we quote it from the Zohar and the Medrash. This refers to the mothers and the mountains, the peaks to the Ovis. But and only afterwards, from there, they emerge in actual feelings in the heart, where that's where Yisrael emerges. Now, because of the pasuk is exact in how he sees the Tzurim and how he sees the Gvois. The mountain peaks, I see them. Migvois Ashurenu, and from the hills, Ashurenu, I behold them. What's the difference Shebetzurim Avos Chachma. When it comes to Tzurim, namely Avos Chachma, Lakat Aloshin Arel, I see, he says, with respect to that, to Chachma. Big voice in Mois Bina, and voice, which is the mothers and hence Bina, Lakat Loshin Asherenu. What's the difference between the two? Asherenu means a good look. A lahabit means to look at something critically, something to gaze.
To size it up.
Yeah. I see him and needs to look critically. He looks penetratingly. Targum Sharabota, and Havota also is the same. We're going to see that Havota, the Targum, gives the same translation as Ashurenu. By Ashurenu, he says, Skise, I see him. By the Targum, Vayabet Aplishti Vayira, it's talking about Goliath and David HaMelech. So Vayabet Aplishti, so he looked at him, at this, as he describes him, this child, this thin, small child, you put up to fight against me. So Vayabet means he examined him, and he saw him. So there, the Targum too explains it. What's the double lashon? So the Iskase Plishto V'chaza. Iskase means first he looked penetratingly, and then V'chaza, then he saw. He analyzed him, and then the V'chaza is the final view. So what do we see from his moving Shachilik Shebein Arenu Lasharenu and our pasuk? The Targum teaches Asherenu v'Iskase. The difference is Kamei Aloshin Achilik Shebein Riya Lahabata. So the difference is between seeing in Habata and looking intently. When you say Habata, it's scrutiny when you're close up. The Riya Merachik, and seeing is from the distance. Okay, the Piddish Rashi, furthermore we see this in Rashi, the pasuk, the Yidden was struck with the Nachosh and the fiery serpents for speaking against Abish and Moishe. So the pasuk says, Hashem told Moshe to make a snake. He made a copper snake and put it on a pole. So those who saw it, and then it adds v'hibit, were healed. So Rashi points out why the shyness. So Rashi says there that if you were bitten by another animal, so then all you have to do was just look at it, glance at it, just ordinary looking. But to be cured from the nachash, had to be v'hibit. Maybe by kavana, to look with kavana, with intent. Rashi goes on to say, but what's the intent? It's not the nachash me'imisamachai. It's not the serpent that gives life and death, but the Eibishter. So realize why all this is coming, and then you'll be healed. Do tshuva and you'll be healed. So all to say, what's our conclusion? So when it comes to Chachma Tziriyah from the distance, when it comes to Mikvois, being the Asherenu, that is a close-up look. I see him distantly or I see him close. So now we understand the difference. So the midas, the way they are incorporated within Chachma, so they're so not discernible, that it's distant, not having because they are very distant from emerging as independent identities. They're there in the vaguest, latent potential way. Given. So b'chochma, it's not shaykh to see the midas close up. Given shamatzias midas enaniris. You're not going to see the midas emerge because they're not discernible. Kim sheyideya umevin. It's more like they got to be there because there has to be. They have to be there because Chachma is the source from which midas emerge. Ava The chesed, whether it's av and chesed, or yafacha, the opposite. And already in the Nekudas HaChochma is the emotional response that's going to be to the understanding of this Indian. Although the emotion is very far removed from emerging or being felt or experienced, but it's there, like again, like the fire is in the tzur. So you're seeing the midas from the distance. It's one acknowledgement that they're there, but they're not discernible. Hashenkin bebina migvois elo imois, referring to the mother's bina. So here the midas already emerged somewhat in the world of intellect in a way that through a discerning look and a close look that can be identified. It's a close look. It means to say they're close. They're close to emerging. And abata means with intent, as Rashi said, that was the last quote. What's the intent here? There's already an identified direction where the seichel is going to go. Kavana means, the word kavan literally means direction. Kivun is a direction. So we mean usually in kavan is to direct the thought in a certain subject, not elsewhere. Here, same in the Nekudah, but even more specific. Kavana means here that the mind is already directed towards a particular emotion. In Bina, we can already see, it's already discernible where this is going to end up emotionally. What's the emotional response going to be? What's the achra? What's the decision, as it were? What achra actually means? To weigh on one side or another. Because it's been already, the whole thing has been developed with the reasons. Chachmas and Nekudas emes, and bin is already the reasons for the way that thing is, the way it is. So there's reasons already and definition, so that already is pointing towards a specific emotional response of closeness or distance, whatever the emotion is. Clear? Hence, yeah, we're good. Yeah. Yes, gents. Eis Vav. Eis Dalet. Hine Noisev Allah Malay El Shalidis, I mean, there's been a Moichin and Hilachre, Hayusam Midis Klon Ben Moichin. So in addition to the fact that we're saying now that the birth of the Midas is after they emerge, after they have been present on these two levels in Moichin, Chachma first, Meresh Tzur Mareno, and then Bina, Migveis Ashereno. So in Gam La'achrei Shenel Da Midas, even after the Midas have been born, the emotional response has been born, emerged. Mislabshim ha'moichin b'midas, and the intellect continues to be invested in the midah, because we're talking about a midah, an emotion. It's not instinctual, natural, but an emotion born from intellectual appreciation. And before he discovered this truth, was introduced to it, and became intellectually intimate with it through bina, he had no feelings for it, perhaps not even aware of it. In brackets, so we're contrasting these kinds of midas that are born and created by intellect, as opposed to instinctual midas. In brackets, like my midas tivium, not like natural midas that a child has, for example. Think loves and fears. You don't see there that they are born of moichin. Now he says, just to note, he doesn't say that there's no moichin, but it's not discernible. There cannot be emotion without some kind of awareness in the mind. but that's not the awareness we speak of here, chachma and bina process. It's much more instinctual and a much more, what I'm looking for, essential in terms of the senses. Chas v'sholom, the mind is shut down, and there's no feelings at all. But leinika, it's not certainly not through the process of chachma and bina, since the emotions we speak of in terms of midas tiviyim are natural. You know, you hit me, I get angry, which is an offshoot of gvura. You give me food, so I love you, I'm drawn to you, etc. Primitive, that's primitive emotions. That's what we speak of. Here we speak of emotions that are born from a discovery. So by zeh gufa, in this itself, in what? In the emotions born from chachma and bina. Yesh basic fanim is two ways. Also I have to point out, so it's on the gear to the maamar, and maybe in the end I'll say it. It's not the pshat that emotions are born, yesh ma'ayin as it were, from intellect. Emotions are actually rooted in the nefesh deeper than moichin. Moichin is what unlocks them, what stirs them, what gives birth to them, but not in the sense that they are the ultimate shirish or origin. Could be, I didn't learn the rest of the mind, but could be that's going to be brought out. Akoponim, although I don't think so. At any rate, so now he's saying what? That, let's get the flow again. That in the emergence of the midas from moichin, there's two efanim. Number one, Yislapshus HaChachma Midas. So what dominates the midas is the nekudas HaChachma. You need both, Chachma and Bina. But there's two ways that the midas can emerge, where they're still dominated by the bittul, by the epiphany of Chachma. Or Bina dominates, the understanding fuels, the epiphany fuels or the understanding fuels, the midas. In brackets, Bedugmas Beis Eifanim Shebiskalos Amidas B'Moichin, just like there are two levels where midas exist in moichin. So too, there are two levels where moichin exist in the emerged midas. So there is, as in the bracket still, the way the moichin are in midas, his scholars been now is going by the matalamina because it's talking about the world of midas. So there is the way they are in bina, mikvois hashem. No, the lamanim is a scholars b'chochma, the way the midas are in chochma. We're complete. What's the word again? No, I certainly can't think of no, Adam, you told me the word last time. I see it, but I just can't say it now.
Subsumed.
Oh, that's the word. Maybe even more than that, but so the same way that we thank you, the two darkness of the way the midas exist in Seichel, so too, there's two Eifanim with the Seichel exist in the midas. Sheim Beis, after the brackets now. Shem Beis found in the two ways, in the way the moichin continue to influence the midas. Noise, ala midas atzma, in addition to looking at the midas themselves, where the moichin recedes. There could be a state where seichel and midas produced it, now he's just in the world of emotion, consciously disconnected from what the epiphany and the Holy Bond is brought to the emotion. We're not speaking that now. Now we're speaking about the way the emotion, the intellect continues to guide and govern, be invested in the midas. Which is a recent ayom about Moishe, right? So there's two kinds of moichin where he's going to define in a moment. The translations are moichin Yanika, where there is a Yanika means literally nourishment, and then there's moichin de gadlos, where the moichin are present in a more manifested way in the midas. The midas are nourished from seichel, or they're defined by the seichel, moichin de gadlos. What does this mean? let's continue. Now, the whole point of learning all of this is to understand the neshama. Yisrael de le'ela, and therefore Yisrael de lamata, what's invested in us of the Eibishter. What's invested in us in a conscious way is his chachman, his bin, and to understand what that means, you have to understand the way it is, lamata, and then an appreciation of what that means, lamaila, and by that we mean within each and every one of us. So we're looking at these two efanim where chachma continues to, in a conscious way virtually, guide the midas or bina. The midas driven by the epiphany, by the vision, the original vision. That's what dominates the midas that emerge, or the midas driven by the appreciation and analysis of that vision of the epiphany. Very different kind of emotions. Let's see. Let's look at the way emotions are with us. There are different ways. So there are the midas, the way down a child. He's not shaykh to intellectual understanding. Nonetheless, the things that he loves. Things that he hates. He's afraid of. On the contrary, the emotions of a child are much more intense because they're not limited and guided by seichel, by consideration. And therefore, he's moved to tears, start crying in an instant. Or takes a second later. That's, by the way, the great art of parenting. One of the great arts of parenting is to be able to quickly distract a child to even an opposite emotion. I see over and over again watching parents. You get drawn into the emotion and try to explain why you shouldn't be angry at getting it. No, that's not the way to deal with a child. The way to deal with a child in emotion is to distract him or her completely with an opposite thing, with something the kid enjoys and it's pleasurable, whatever. And in a moment, the tears can become replaced with simcha. Parents are chacham and bina. That's what they should be doing, and bring themselves to bear as parents to the child's unbridled, emotional, and irruptible state. So it's immediate. And in a moment, it can change emotionally from one age to the other. It's an art, my friends, to be able to do that.
You're saying it's an art for a parent to be a parent and not an emotional child.
Yeah, I didn't even know you said an art for a parent to be
to apply, more to become, to not to address the seichel behind it, but to address the emotion behind it. Because if you're addressing the seichel behind it, the kid doesn't relate to it because he's all emotional.
Yeah.
You don't go explain something to the kid. You just like.
Yeah. Yeah.
Without going off track, wouldn't that depend on if you've started to have, if we're talking here about the, what's it called? Katnus. At some point, a child does start to get some of the seichel into the midas, and you can't ignore that it's there, and that's when education begins in terms of intellectual education.
Yeah, for sure.
Not when he's having his fit.
Well, we're talking 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds, little children. When they get older, it has to be discussion and dialogue. Yeah, distraction is not going to work. It reminds me of a story that the Rabbi told once in the early years. I think it was talking Yud Beis Tmuz, the end of the Fabrengen, Tavshin Yudal. We've quoted from that. It was a famous long Fabrengen. 1954. I think it was that Verbringen. So the end, he's extraordinary Verbringen, and Igunim and things that Rebbe said. At the end of the Verbringen, he told the story that Rebbe Hashem, Hashem, Yikrim Doma, she and her husband, Menachem Mendel Hardenstein, were murdered in Treblinka. They used to say Kaddish for them. So when she was a child, she was crying, as children do. So they gave her a candy. So she took the candy, and she started eating the candy, but she announced, I'm only taking a break now. I'm having the candy. You haven't appeased me. I'll continue to cry, whatever that she wanted. So the Rebbe told that story and said, we're just taking a short break between now and the next Verbringen. We have to go to work. Guys, it was close to 7 o'clock in the morning. He was saying you have to take the 7 o'clock train to Manhattan. Guys are going to work in Manhattan. So I'm a visitor, Rebbe smiled. We're only taking a short break between the next Verbringen. That's where Chassid belongs. In between, we've got to go and do what we have to do, but we're not being distracted from our true selves. Never told that story about the Rebbe Hashem. So back to the child, to the midas. Yeah. So Kivin, what was the word Kivin? Yeah, I don't see a number here. 7, 8 lines down. Kivin sheinzim bevusas miyusad al davar shemichutz lamidas, because the emotions are not really based on something outside the emotional world itself. Kima midas bilvad. It's purely an emotional response that the child has. I want, I don't want. Or midas dekatnus, and the midas therefore are small because they're not invested. There's not invested in them seichel. I'm sorry, they don't have the expansiveness of moichin, very narrow. That's why, because they're narrow and not broad and all-encompassing, and they're very specific, I want this. So Yochali should take off miyad tigomer midah, so this midah can end. It's very narrow boundaries, and then the taschil, it's narrow but intense. But the taschil midah hafches, and another emotion, an opposite emotion, can replace it. No, that's mama's childhood. Then the child grows, and the intellect develops and begins to affect. Well, the shano isn't to change. In Yiddish, to transform as amidis. Now, this requires already avoida that requires contemplating truths that will lead to emotional changes. Number one, shlianiach in Yiddish is only nachgeben. That a person shouldn't just give into leherges shalev, the feelings of the heart. But he should do that which the intellect dictates. He knows what's right, understands it, and therefore, notwithstanding, he's emotionally pulled towards whatever it is. Now, maturity, that's the definition of maturity. The fundamental definition of maturity is that a person can behave contrary to the way he feels as a consequence of conviction, intellectual conviction. That's maturity. That's an adult. That's why a child before 13 and 12 and so on, or even 20, is not responsible, because the mind hasn't developed yet to be able to assert itself this way over the heart. So it's known, I don't know if God who this is, but the saying, maybe somebody knows, the Pizgam, the statement of the Frierdiker Rebbe, the Balagula Vasimcha, his Tmuz, who's...
Rabbi skipped a couple of lines.
I skipped a couple of lines, sorry. Kiyadua 31. Yeah, number 31. Sheikar Rabbi, this Adam is quoting from the Frierdiker Rebbe here, in the Kutei Deburim and other places, that what's the Ikar Avodah, B'yichud Inyan Achsidus. In fact, it's one of the definitions of Chassidus. Kol inyan Chassidus is the shanis teva midis two lashonos. The shanis teva midoisov. One lashon is to change the nature of his emotions, or another l'shanis midoisov ativim, to change his natural midus. Like the two expressions over there. The Rebbe addresses this in, we learned it, friends. In Inyan Shateres Chassidus, the basic distinction is, the first one is Teva Midah, you have to change the nature of his middas. If he has destructive middas, to change them, contain them and first change them. So we're dealing about the unsavory middas, petty, angry, jealous, etc. Vindictive. And then there's a higher avodah, the shanis teva midoisav, to change the nature of his middas is a reference to even the good emotions. Naturally born in a naturally nice person, a naturally sensitive person, and naturally moved, and as natural empathy, people we're born with. We're born with natural good middas, and for that matter, the Nefesh Elikis obviously has natural good middas. That's the second meaning. So to change Teva Midoisav is even the good stuff of the Nefesh Bahamis, to push that beyond the natural limit, and the Iker Nefesh Elikis. And even the Nefesh Elikis, to push the Nefesh Elikis beyond its natural disposition, which is good to begin with. But that's Kol Avodas Adam. It's one of the definitions of Chassidus. The Kol Inyan Chassidus is to change the middas, first to master them, to control them, and then to transform them. I was privileged to see such Chassidim that worked in this their entire life. Most notably, I'm mentioning this now because I was asked to write about him. Reb Zalman Serebransky, Allah Shalom, as I mentioned him the other day then. He's the father of Rabbi Aaron that showed me the letter, as you recall, that Rabbi Golden wrote to Reb Zalman. Reb Zalman was the main shliach to Australia. Yeah, I told you about him. He sat in the back of the shul, the corner. And Reb Zalman, he partially worked on himself his whole life, on his middas, by nature. You can see because of his avodah. By nature, he was a very clever man. He was intolerant of foolishness, stupidities, and just very gvura. His nature was gvura. But he worked on himself, lifelong. Remember, he did lifelong. Yiddish, a Jew that's walked through, and it was very, very inspiring to see such a chassid. Okay, so that will continue Be'ez Hashem tomorrow. This is the Ikar Avodas Adam. Yeah. No, we're up to. Let's just finish this thing. You do a Pisgah Malagula by Simcha. So then there's known the statement of the Fidik Rebbe Sh'omar ben Gila Chosid Bal Tzura. I remember it was. He said about a Chosid Bal Tzura means sort of a form, literally, person, stature. Shekol's Manchli Shoma Yin Zem Rebbe, who he said about himself that till he didn't hear this, the Alter Rebbe, I don't know, Alter Rebbe's Chassidim. The Inyan of Chassidus is to change, work on the middas. By me, he said the emotions are like the animal standing, the behemoth, the cattle, standing in the singular, in the stall. Behemoths were staying in stall. So the behemoths there quietly and mature and so on, but fundamentally behemoth. No real change. In brackets, he's standing there in the stall and contained and not on a wild rampage. This is not midas that are really truly born from Seichel that I only discovered when he discovered Chassidus. Okay, so let's continue that tomorrow. And Blined, I'm going to look up Lakota Diburim. What can you do? Where's the story? What's the source of that? Doesn't say. No. Okay.
What time tomorrow?